I have always believed that the dead stay buried, that what we freeze remains frozen. That ice, once solid, does not move on its own. I was wrong about all of those things, and what I discovered in that research station has changed everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Rook. I am 32 years old, and I need to tell you what happened in the Arctic Research Facility before someone else finds what we left behind. The package arrived on my desk 3 weeks before I flew to Alaska. Inside was a contract, a plane ticket, and a single photograph of a research station surrounded by endless white. The letter was brief. They needed a glaciologist with experience in ancient ice core analysis. The pay was triple my university salary. The project was classified. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why they were so desperate. But I had student loans and a career that was going nowhere, so I signed the papers and boarded the flight to Anchorage. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were being watched by something that should not be able to see? Have you ever heard movement in a room you know is empty? If you have experienced anything like what I am about to describe, please share your story in the comments below. I need to know I am not the only one who has seen what lives in the ice. The station was located 200 miles north of Fairbanks, accessible only by helicopter during the summer months. When I arrived in late September, the sun was already beginning its long retreat. The pilot who flew me out barely spoke during the 2-hour flight. He kept glancing at me in the mirror, and I caught something in his expression that might have been pity. When we landed on the station's helipad, he handed me my bags and said only 4 words: "Do not trust the ice." I laughed it off as some kind of local superstition. I wish I had listened. The Arctic Research Facility was smaller than I expected. 6 buildings connected by enclosed walkways, all painted a bright orange that stood out against the white landscape like a wound. The main structure housed the laboratories, living quarters, and common areas. The other buildings contained equipment storage, the power generator, communications, a greenhouse, and what they called the deep storage vault. I would come to know that last building very well. Dr. Emily met me at the entrance. She was in her mid-50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that looked like they had not seen sleep in days. She shook my hand with a grip that was too firm, too desperate. "You are Rook?" she asked, though she clearly knew who I was. "Thank God, we have been waiting for someone with your expertise." She led me through the main building, walking quickly, talking quickly, as if she needed to get everything out before something stopped her. The facility had been operational for 3 years, she explained. Their primary mission was to extract and analyze ice cores from the permafrost below. They were studying climate patterns from thousands of years ago, looking for data about historical temperature changes. Standard research. Nothing unusual. Except 3 months ago, they found something in the ice that was not supposed to be there. We stopped outside the main laboratory. Through the window, I could see rows of freezer units and examination tables. 2 other researchers were inside, both wearing heavy coats despite the building's heating system. They looked exhausted, haunted. "Before I show you the samples," Emily said, "I need you to understand something. What we found defies conventional explanation. I have been a scientist for 30 years and I cannot rationalize what I have seen. If you want to leave now, I will arrange for the helicopter to come back. No questions asked. No consequences." I should have taken that offer. Instead, I said, "Show me." The laboratory was colder than it should have been. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. Emily introduced me to the other 2 researchers. David was a climatologist from Oregon, probably in his early 40s, with a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles. Amanda was a microbiologist from Texas, younger than the others, maybe 28, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested weeks of poor sleep. They both looked at me with the same expression the helicopter pilot had worn, pity mixed with something else. Relief, maybe, that they were no longer the newest person here. Emily led me to a freezer unit at the back of the lab. She entered a code on the keypad, and the door opened with a hiss of escaping cold air. Inside were dozens of cylindrical containers, each labeled with dates and coordinates. She pulled out one marked core sample 47B, August 15th, depth 847 meters. This came from nearly half a mile down, she said, placing the container on an examination table. The ice is approximately 42,000 years old, pre-human civilization, from a time when this entire region was covered by glaciers twice as thick as they are now. She opened the container. Inside was a section of ice core about 18 inches long and 4 inches in diameter. At first glance, it looked like any other ancient ice sample I had seen, cloudy white with occasional air bubbles trapped inside. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were shapes in the ice, dark shapes. At first I thought they were mineral deposits or organic matter, but they were too uniform, too deliberate. They looked almost like handprints. "Is that?" I started to ask, but Emily held up a hand. "Watch," she said. We stood there in silence for 30 seconds. A minute, nothing happened. I was about to suggest we move on when I saw it. One of the dark shapes inside the ice shifted, just slightly, just enough that I knew I had not imagined it. "What was that?" I asked. "We do not know," David said from behind me. He had moved closer without me noticing. "It has been doing that since we extracted it. The shapes move. They change position. Sometimes they disappear entirely, then reappear somewhere else in the sample." Amanda stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "And it is not just this one. We have 47 cores showing the same phenomenon, all of them extracted from depths below 800 meters. All of them dated to roughly the same time period, 40,000 to 45,000 years ago." I reached out to touch the container and Emily grabbed my wrist. "Do not," she said, "not with bare skin." "Why not?" "Because the last person who did is no longer with us." The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I pulled my hand back slowly. "What happened to them?" Emily exchanged glances with David and Amanda. Whatever they were about to tell me, they had debated whether to share it. Finally, Emily spoke. "His name was Thomas. He was our lead researcher before you arrived. 3 weeks ago, he was examining one of the samples late at night, alone. We found him the next morning in the deep storage vault where we keep the cores at their optimal temperature. He was frozen solid. But Rook, the temperature in that vault never drops below -20 Celsius, not cold enough to freeze a human being in the span of a few hours. And yet he was frozen," I finished for her. "Not just frozen," Amanda added. "Crystallized. His body had become ice, actual ice. The medical examiner said it was impossible, said there was no way human tissue could undergo that kind of transformation so quickly. But we all saw it. We all saw what was left of Thomas." I looked back at the ice core on the table. The dark shape inside had moved again. This time I was certain. It had shifted closer to the surface of the ice, as if it were trying to reach out. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Emily's expression was grim. "We need you to figure out what these things are, where they came from, and most importantly, we need you to help us understand how to stop them from spreading." "Spreading?" She walked to a computer terminal and pulled up a series of images. They showed ice cores from different depths, all containing similar dark shapes. But in the more recent photographs, the shapes were larger, more defined, and in some of them I could swear I saw what looked like faces. "Every sample we extract shows more activity than the last," Emily explained. "The shapes are becoming more complex, more organized. And 3 days ago, we found something in the permafrost that was not there before." She pulled up a final image. It was a photograph taken from above, showing the ground outside the facility. In the snow, clearly visible even from the aerial perspective, were dozens of handprints. They formed a circle around the main building, each one pressed deep into the ice as if something had crawled up from below. "We did not make those," David said. "And there are no animals in this region large enough to leave prints like that. They appeared overnight. One day the ground was clear. The next morning this." I stared at the image, trying to process what I was seeing. The handprints were too large to be human. Each one had 6 fingers instead of 5, and they all pointed toward the facility, as if whatever made them had been trying to claw its way inside. "There is something else," Amanda said quietly. "We have been hearing sounds at night, coming from the deep storage vault, scratching sounds, like something trying to get out." I felt my pulse quicken. Every instinct told me to walk away, to demand they call the helicopter back immediately. But there was something else too, a curiosity that I could not ignore, a need to understand what I was seeing. "When can I examine the samples?" I asked. Emily looked relieved. "Tonight, after dinner. We do our most detailed work after dark when there is less interference from the daylight cycle. But Rook, there are rules you need to follow. Never examine the samples alone. Never touch them without gloves. And never, under any circumstances, go into the deep storage vault by yourself after 10 p.m. "Why 10 p.m. specifically?" "Because that is when they become most active. That is when the shapes start moving faster. That is when we hear the scratching." I nodded slowly, though nothing about this felt right. "All right, I will follow your protocols, but I need access to all your research. Every note, every photograph, every recording you have made since you found the first sample." "Of course," Emily said. "David will show you to your quarters. Get settled. We eat at 6 p.m. The work begins at 8. As I followed David out of the laboratory, I glanced back one more time at the ice core on the examination table. The dark shape inside had moved again, and this time I was certain it had turned to face me. My room was small but functional. A bed, a desk, a window that looked out over the frozen landscape. I unpacked my belongings and tried to process everything I had just learned. Ancient ice, moving shapes, a researcher frozen solid, handprints in the snow. None of it made sense. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop, intending to review some of the facility's research files that David had transferred to me. But before I could start reading, I noticed something strange. On the window, just visible in the fading light, was a thin layer of frost forming on the inside of the glass. That should not have been possible. The building was heated. The window was insulated. I reached out to touch the frost, and the moment my fingers made contact, I heard it. A sound like whispering, so faint I almost thought I had imagined it. But it was there. Multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in a language I did not recognize. I pulled my hand back, and the whispering stopped. Outside, the sun was nearly gone. The Arctic night was coming, and somewhere below us, buried in ice that had been frozen for 42,000 years, something was waking up. Dinner was a quiet affair. The 4 of us sat in the common area, eating reheated stew that tasted like cardboard. Nobody spoke much. Emily kept glancing at her watch. David pushed food around his plate without eating. Amanda stared at the window, watching the darkness settle over the landscape like a blanket. I tried to break the silence. "How long have you all been here?" "Too long," David muttered. Emily shot him a look before answering. "I have been here since the facility opened 3 years ago. David joined us 18 months ago. Amanda arrived last winter. Thomas had been here for 2 years before." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Did Thomas notice anything unusual before he died?" I asked. "Any changes in behavior? Any signs something was wrong?" Amanda finally looked away from the window. "He became obsessed, spent every night in the laboratory examining the samples. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. He said he could hear them calling to him." "Calling to him? What do you mean?" "He said the ice was alive, that the shapes inside were not just anomalies or mineral deposits. He said they were something else, something that had been waiting." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Waiting for what? He never got the chance to tell us, Emily said. We found him the morning after he made that claim, frozen in the vault. His hand was pressed against one of the storage containers, as if he had been trying to open it when the cold took him. I set down my fork, my appetite gone. And you are certain the vault's temperature could not have caused that? We have checked the systems 100 times, David said. The refrigeration units were functioning normally. The temperature never dropped below -20 Celsius. But Thomas's body temperature when we found him was -196 Celsius. That is colder than dry ice. That is colder than anything we can produce with our equipment. The number hung in the air like a curse. -196 Celsius. That was nearly the temperature of liquid nitrogen. No human being could reach that temperature naturally, and no malfunction of the refrigeration system could explain it. Where is his body now? I asked. The three of them exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, Emily spoke. We buried him in the permafrost, outside, behind the facility. We had no choice. We could not transport him. His body was too fragile, too crystallized. When the medical examiner tried to move him, his arm broke off like glass. I felt my stomach turn. You left him out there. We marked the location, Amanda said defensively. We said words. We did what we could, but we could not risk bringing him inside, not after what we saw. What did you see? Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. It is nearly 8 p.m. We should get to the laboratory. You need to see the samples for yourself. You need to understand what we are dealing with. As we walked through the enclosed corridor connecting the common area to the laboratory building, I noticed the temperature dropping with each step. By the time we reached the lab, I could see my breath again. The heating system was running. I could hear it humming in the walls, but the cold seemed to seep through anyway. The laboratory was exactly as I had left it earlier. Rows of freezer units, examination tables, equipment for analyzing ice cores. But now, in the darkness beyond the windows, the facility felt different, more isolated, more vulnerable. Emily led me to a different freezer unit, this one larger than the others. She entered a longer code on the keypad, and the door opened with a hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. Inside were larger containers, each one holding ice cores that were 3 feet long instead of 18 inches. These are from the deepest extraction, she explained, pulling out a container marked Core Sample 89A, July 22nd, depth 1,247 meters. This one came from nearly 3/4 of a mile down. The ice here is estimated to be 68,000 years old, from the last ice age. She placed the container on the examination table under a bright overhead light. When I looked at the ice core inside, I felt my breath catch in my throat. The shapes inside this sample were not just dark smudges. They were detailed, intricate. I could make out what looked like fingers, arms, the suggestion of faces pressed against the ice from within. It looked like people had been frozen in the middle of reaching out, trying to escape. My God, I whispered, what is this? We have 3 theories, David said, moving to stand beside me. Theory 1. These are prehistoric humans who somehow became trapped in the ice during a rapid freeze event. Theory 2. These are some kind of mineral formation that coincidentally resembles human forms. Theory 3. These are something else entirely, something we do not have a name for. Which theory do you believe? None of them explained the movement, Amanda said. She had put on thick gloves and was adjusting the lighting over the sample. Minerals do not move. Dead bodies do not move. And yet, watch. We stood in silence, staring at the ice core. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, one of the hand-shaped shadows inside the ice began to shift. The fingers curled inward, forming a fist. Then they extended again, as if beckoning. I stepped back involuntarily. That is impossible. We have video documentation of hundreds of similar movements, Emily said. She pulled up footage on a nearby monitor. The screen showed time-lapse recordings of various ice cores, all displaying the same phenomenon: shapes moving inside solid ice, changing position, reaching toward the surface. In one clip, I watched as a face-like shape pressed against the inner surface of the ice, its mouth opening in what looked like a silent scream. "We have analyzed the ice structure," David continued. "There is no internal melting, no temperature fluctuations that would allow for movement within the solid mass. The ice remains frozen at a constant temperature, and yet the shapes move as if the ice were not there at all." I forced myself to step closer to the examination table, studying the sample more carefully. The detail in the shapes was extraordinary. I could see what looked like individual fingers, the curve of a palm, even the suggestion of fingernails. If these were mineral deposits, they were impossibly precise. If these were prehistoric humans, they were impossibly well preserved. And if they were something else? "Have you tried extracting any of the shapes?" I asked, melting the ice to see what is actually inside. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. I saw frost beginning to form on the examination table around the container. "Thomas tried that," Amanda said quietly, 2 days before he died. He took one of the smaller samples and began a controlled melt in an isolation chamber. We were watching through the observation window. The ice started to liquefy normally, but when it was about halfway melted, the shape inside began to move more violently. It was thrashing. And then... She stopped, unable to continue. Emily picked up the story. "The temperature in the isolation chamber dropped to -100 degrees Celsius in under 30 seconds. The water that had melted refroze instantly. But it did not just refreeze, it expanded. The glass of the isolation chamber shattered. The sample was destroyed. And Thomas, who had been standing closest to the chamber, said he felt something touch his face. Something cold. He had a handprint on his cheek, 6 fingers. It stayed there for hours before fatting. I felt my skin crawl. Do you have photographs?" Emily nodded and pulled up an image on the monitor. It showed Thomas's face, and there, clearly visible on his left cheek, was a pale mark in the perfect shape of a hand. A hand with 6 fingers. "This was taken 6 hours after the incident," Emily said. "By the next morning the mark had faded, but Thomas was different after that. He became obsessed with the samples. He said they were trying to communicate with him. He said they wanted out. Out of the ice. Out of everything. Out of the ground. Out of their prison. He said they had been trapped for thousands of years, waiting for someone to find them, waiting for the ice to thin enough that they could reach through." I looked back at the sample on the table. The hand-shaped shadow had moved again. It was now pressed flat against the side of the ice core, as if it were feeling the boundary of its container. "What do you think they are?" I asked, honestly, setting aside scientific rigor for a moment. "What do you believe is in this ice?" Emily was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I think they are the dead. I think something happened here 68,000 years ago, something catastrophic. And I think these people, or whatever they were caught in it, frozen so quickly that their consciousness became trapped, suspended, and now, as the ice melts, as the permafrost thaws, they are waking up." The overhead light flickered, once, twice, then steadied. "The power has been unreliable lately," David said, but I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "The generator has been acting up." "Since when?" I asked. "Since we started extracting the deeper samples." Another flicker. This time, the light went out completely for 3 full seconds before coming back on. In that brief moment of darkness, I could have sworn I heard whispering again. Multiple voices, coming from the freezer units. "We should check the generator," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Make sure everything is functioning properly." "The generator building is across the compound," Amanda said. "We would need to go outside." "Then we go outside." Emily shook her head. "Not after dark. That is one of our rules. Nobody goes outside after dark unless it is an absolute emergency." "Why not?" She walked to the window and pointed. Outside, in the beam of the facility's floodlights, I could see the snow-covered ground. And there, clearly visible even from this distance, were the handprints. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. They formed concentric circles around the building, each ring closer than the last. "Those were not there this morning," Emily said. "We checked. They appear after sunset. Every night there are more of them. Every night they get closer to the buildings." I stared at the handprints, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. They were too organized to be random, too deliberate. Something was making them. Something was circling the facility, night after night, drawing nearer. "What happens if they reach the buildings?" I asked. "We do not know," David said, "and we do not want to find out." The light flickered again. This time it stayed off for nearly 10 seconds. In the darkness I heard movement, not from inside the laboratory but from below, from beneath the floor. A scratching sound, rhythmic, insistent. When the lights came back on, I saw that frost had formed on every surface in the laboratory. The examination table was covered in a thin layer of ice. The windows were completely frosted over, and the container holding the ice core sample had cracked. Not shattered, but developed a single, clean fracture running from top to bottom. "We need to get out of here," Amanda said, backing toward the door. "Now." But before any of us could move, all the lights in the building went out simultaneously. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in dim red light. And in that crimson glow, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The shapes inside the ice cores were glowing. A faint, pale blue light emanating from within the frozen samples. Every container and every freezer unit throughout the laboratory was glowing with the same eerie luminescence. "This has never happened before," Emily whispered. "This is new." The scratching sound from below grew louder, more insistent. It was joined by other sounds, tapping, like fingernails on glass, coming from inside the freezer units. I moved closer to the cracked container on the examination table. Through the fracture in the plastic, I could see the ice core more clearly. The glowing shapes inside were moving faster now, writhing, and they were all reaching toward the crack as if they knew it was there, as if they recognized it as a weakness, a way out. "We need to secure this," I said, reaching for the container. "Do not touch it," Emily shouted, but it was too late. My fingers made contact with the cold plastic, and immediately I felt something surge up my arm. Not pain exactly, worse than pain. It was cold beyond cold. Cold that burned. Cold that felt alive. My hand stuck to the container, frozen to it, and I could not pull away. Images flooded my mind. Visions of a world covered in ice, of people running, screaming, a storm that came out of nowhere. A freeze so sudden that birds fell from the sky like stones, and something else. Something in the storm, something conscious. Something that was not weather at all, but something that wore the storm like a cloak. I saw faces in the ice. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, all frozen in mid-scream, all reaching out, all desperate to escape. And I understood then what Thomas had understood. These were not just dead people. These were souls, consciousness without bodies, trapped in the ice for millennia, aware, suffering, waiting. And now, as the world warmed, as the permafrost thawed, they were close to breaking free. David grabbed my shoulders and pulled hard, breaking my contact with the container. I fell backward, gasping, my hand numb and white with cold. When I looked at my palm, there was a mark. The same six-fingered handprint that had appeared on Thomas's face. "What did you see?" Amanda asked, kneeling beside me. "Rook, what did you see?" I tried to speak, but my teeth were chattering too hard. Emily wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, but it did nothing to stop the shaking. The cold I felt was not external. It was inside me, in my bones, in my blood. "They are not dead," I finally managed to say. "They are trapped, and they are angry." The emergency lights flickered. The scratching from below stopped suddenly, replaced by a different sound. Footsteps, heavy, slow, coming up from the sublevel where the deep storage vault was located. "The vault," David said, his face pale in the red light. "Something is coming up from the vault." We all turned to look at the door leading to the stairwell. It was closed, locked, but through the small window in the door I could see movement in the darkness beyond. A figure, tall, moving with an unnatural gait, coming closer. "Is anyone else in the facility?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We are the only ones here," Emily said. "We are the only living people within 200 miles. The figure reached the door. Through the window I could see it more clearly now. It was humanoid in shape but wrong, too tall, too thin. Its movements were jerky like a puppet on strings, and when it pressed its face against the window I saw that it had no features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin the color of old ice. It raised one hand and pressed it against the glass. 6 long fingers splayed wide. Then it began to scratch. The scratching sound was unbearable. Not just the sound itself, but what it represented. Something that should not exist was on the other side of that door, trying to get in. The figure's fingers left trails of frost on the glass with each scrape, forming patterns that looked almost like writing in a language I did not recognize. "The vault," Emily said, her voice shaking. "We need to check the vault. If something came up from there, the samples might be compromised." "Are you insane?" David backed away from the door. "We are not going down there, not with that thing between us and the stairwell." "We do not have a choice," Emily insisted. "If the containment units have failed, if the samples are exposed to warmer temperatures, we do not know what will happen. The reaction could spread through the entire facility." The scratching stopped. The figure remained motionless, its blank face pressed against the window. Then slowly it began to tilt its head. Left, right, left again. The movement was too smooth, too mechanical. Nothing living moved like that. "There is another way to the vault," Amanda said suddenly. "Through the equipment storage building. There is a service tunnel that connects to the sublevel. We installed it last year as an emergency access route." "Then we use it," I said, forcing myself to stand despite the numbness in my hand. The 6-fingered mark on my palm was glowing faintly, the same pale blue as the shapes in the ice cores. "But we need to move now, before more of them come." "More of them?" David's voice cracked. "You think there are more?" I looked at the freezer units lining the laboratory walls. Every one of them was glowing with that eerie blue light. Dozens of containers, dozens of samples, and if each sample contained multiple shapes, multiple trapped consciousnesses. "We need to go," I repeated. Emily grabbed a heavy flashlight and a portable radio. Amanda pulled on a thick coat. David just stood there, staring at the figure in the window, until I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit on the opposite side of the laboratory. We moved quickly through the connecting corridor, the emergency lighting casting everything in that nightmarish red glow. Behind us, I heard the sound of glass breaking. The figure had gotten through the door. It was following us. The equipment storage building was cold, colder than it should have been. Our breath formed thick clouds in the air. The walls were lined with shelves containing scientific instruments, spare parts for the drilling equipment, and emergency supplies. In the back corner was a metal door marked "Sublevel Access, Authorized Personnel Only." Emily fumbled with her key card, her hands shaking. The first swipe did not register, neither did the second. Behind us, we heard footsteps in the corridor, slow, deliberate, getting closer. Come on," Amanda whispered. The third swipe worked. The door clicked open, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. Emily shone her flashlight down, illuminating concrete steps covered in frost. The air rising from below was so cold it burned my lungs. We hurried inside and Emily locked the door behind us. Through the small window, I caught a glimpse of the figure entering the equipment storage building. It moved among the shelves, its elongated limbs bending at angles that seemed impossible. Then it turned its featureless face toward the door, and I knew it had seen us. "Down," Emily commanded, "quickly." The stairwell descended 3 levels. With each step down, the temperature dropped further. By the time we reached the bottom, frost covered every surface. The metal handrail was so cold it burned to touch, even through my gloves. The sublevel was a long corridor lit by emergency lights spaced 20 feet apart. Between each pool of red light was a stretch of darkness that seemed deeper than it should be, as if the shadows themselves were solid things. The walls were bare concrete, and I could see my breath forming ice crystals in the air. "The vault is at the end of the corridor," Emily said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "About 200 feet. We started walking. Our footsteps sounded too loud, each one echoing and re-echoing until it seemed like an army was marching through the darkness. I kept my eyes forward, fighting the urge to look back, to see if the figure had followed us down. Halfway to the vault, Amanda stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" We all went silent. At first I heard nothing but our own breathing and the hum of the emergency lighting. Then I caught it. A sound like wind, but we were underground in a sealed corridor. There was no wind, and yet the sound grew louder, more insistent, until it resolved into something else entirely. Whispering, hundreds of voices, overlapping, speaking in that same unknown language I had heard earlier. The sound was coming from ahead of us, from the vault. "Maybe we should go back," David suggested, but Emily was already moving forward. "We have to know," she said. "We have to see what has happened." The vault door was massive. Steel, 3 inches thick, with a complex locking mechanism designed to maintain the interior temperature at precisely -30°C. It should have been locked. It should have required Emily's key card, a numeric code, and a biometric scan to open. It was standing wide open. Cold air poured out of the vault like water, so dense I could see it flowing along the floor. The whispering grew louder. Inside, beyond the threshold, I could see the blue glow of the stored ice cores, much brighter than the samples in the laboratory above. Emily stepped forward, shining her flashlight into the vault. The beam revealed rows of storage racks, each one containing dozens of cylindrical containers. But something was wrong. Many of the containers were open, empty. The ice cores that should have been inside were gone. "Where are the samples?" Amanda asked, moving to stand beside Emily. "I do not know," Emily replied. "We had over 300 cores stored here. At least half of them are missing." I walked along the rows, examining the empty containers. Some of them showed signs of the plastic melting from the inside out. Others looked like they had been torn open by tremendous force. And on the floor, scattered among the pools of meltwater, were fragments of ice, each one glowing with that pale blue light. "They got out," I said. "Somehow they got out of the containers." "But where did they go?" David's voice was tight with panic. "Ice does not just walk away." As if in answer to his question, the whispering stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. It felt expectant, waiting. Then from the far end of the vault, I heard movement. Not the shuffling of feet, but something else. A sound like ice cracking, like something frozen beginning to thaw and move. Emily swung her flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught something at the back of the vault, in the section where the oldest samples were stored. The containers there were intact, but the ice cores inside them were glowing so brightly it hurt to look at them. And the shapes within were moving frantically, pressing against the walls of their containers, reaching toward us. "They know we are here," Amanda whispered. "They can sense us." One of the containers began to shake, gently at first, then more violently. Cracks appeared in the plastic. The ice core inside was expanding, pushing against the walls of its prison. The blue glow intensified until I had to shield my eyes. "We need to leave," I said, "right now." But before we could move, the container exploded. Not with heat or fire, but with cold. A wave of frigid air blasted through the vault, knocking us backward. Ice shards flew everywhere, each one glowing with that eerie blue light. And in the center of where the container had been, something was forming. It started as just a vague shape, a shadow made of frost and mist, but as I watched, it became more defined, more solid. It took on human form, but taller than any person should be. Its proportions were all wrong, limbs too long, body too thin. And where its face should have been, there was only that smooth, featureless expanse of ice-white skin. It stood there for a moment as if testing its new form. Then it turned toward us. Even without eyes, I knew it was looking at me, at the mark on my hand that still glowed with its pale blue light. It raised one arm, 6 long fingers extended in our direction, and when it opened its mouth, a mouth that had not been there a second before, the sound that emerged was not a voice but pure cold given form. A scream made of winter and death and endless frozen darkness. Emily grabbed my arm and pulled. "Run!" We fled back down the corridor, the thing's scream following us. Behind it, I heard more containers shattering, more shapes forming. The vault was a prison no longer. Whatever had been trapped in that ancient ice for 68,000 years was breaking free. We reached the stairwell and started climbing. My legs burned. My lungs ached from breathing the supercooled air, but fear drove me upward, step after step, away from the things rising in the darkness below. We burst through the door into the equipment storage building. Emily slammed it shut and engaged the lock, though we all knew it would not hold for long. Through the window, I could see pale blue light growing in the stairwell. They were coming. "The main building," Emily gasped. "We can barricade ourselves in the common area, send a distress signal." "And then what?" David demanded. "Wait for rescue. That will take days. We do not have days." "Then what do you suggest?" Emily shot back. I looked around the storage building, my mind racing. Equipment, supplies. And there on a shelf near the back, I saw something that sparked an idea, a dangerous idea, possibly a fatal idea. But it was all I had. "Fire," I said. "We need to burn them." "They are made of ice," Amanda protested. "Fire will just melt them, turn them into water." "No," I said, remembering the visions I had seen when I touched the container. "They are not made of ice. The ice is their prison, their anchor to the physical world. But the consciousness inside, the thing that makes them move, that is something else. Something that exists in the cold. Fire will not just melt them. It will break their connection to this world." Emily stared at me. "How do you know that?" I held up my hand, showing the glowing mark. "Because they showed me. When I touched the sample, I saw what they are. They are souls without bodies, consciousness trapped in frozen water. The ice gives them form, gives them substance in our world. But heat, fire, it disrupts that connection. It severs the bond." "Thomas tried melting a sample," David reminded me. "It just refroze." "Because he used controlled heat in an isolated chamber. We need to destroy them completely, all at once, before they can escape and refreeze somewhere else." A loud bang came from the sublevel door, then another. The metal was starting to buckle. The things from the vault were trying to break through. "The generator building," Emily said suddenly. "We have fuel tanks there, diesel for the generators, propane for the backup heating system. If we could ignite it all at once." "It would destroy the entire facility," David finished, "us included." "Not if we set it on a timer," I said. "Give ourselves enough time to reach the helicopter pad and signal for extraction." Another bang. This time, frost began spreading from the door, creeping across the wall like frozen fingers. The temperature in the room was dropping rapidly. We were running out of time. "There is a problem," Amanda said. "The radio tower is on the generator building. If we blow it up, we lose our ability to call for help." "Then we send the signal first," Emily said. "Call in the helicopter. Tell them it is an emergency evacuation. Then we set the charges and make for the landing pad." It was a terrible plan. Dozens of things could go wrong. The helicopter might not come in time. The charges might not ignite. The things from the ice might catch us before we could escape. But it was the only plan we had. "All right," I said, "let us do it." We grabbed what supplies we could carry: flashlights, flares, emergency blankets. Emily found a first aid kit and stuffed it into a backpack. David located a toolbox containing wire and electrical components we might need to rig the detonation system. The sublevel door exploded outward in a shower of ice and twisted metal. The creatures poured through, 3 of them, 4, more emerging from the stairwell behind. Their forms were more solid now, more defined. I could see details I had not noticed before. The texture of their skin like frosted glass. The way they moved, flowing more than walking. And their hands, all of them, 6 fingers reaching and grasping. We ran through the connecting corridor into the main building toward the exit that led outside. Behind us, the creatures followed. I could hear them, their movements like ice cracking, their voices like winter wind. We burst out into the night. The cold outside hit me like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped to what felt like -40 or more. The sky above was clear, stars brilliant against the darkness. No aurora tonight, just stars and cold and the things behind us that should not exist. The handprints in the snow were everywhere now. Thousands of them covering every inch of ground, all pointing toward the buildings. And as I watched, new ones appeared, forming right before my eyes, as if invisible hands were pressing down into the snow. "Do not look at them," Emily commanded. "Keep moving. The generator building is 50 yards ahead." We ran through the field of handprints. With each step, I felt the mark on my palm growing colder. The blue glow was spreading, creeping up my wrist into my arm. I could feel the cold inside me, in my veins, in my heart. I was becoming like them, like Thomas. If we did not end this soon, I would freeze from the inside out. The generator building was larger than the others, housing the diesel generators that powered the facility and the massive fuel tanks required to keep them running through the long Arctic winter. Emily used her key card to open the door, and we stumbled inside. The warmth from the running generators was a blessing and a curse. It felt wonderful after the terrible cold outside, but it also made me realize how numb I had become. My fingers barely worked. My face felt like leather. The mark on my arm had spread to my elbow. "David, Amanda, start rigging the charges," Emily ordered. "Rook, come with me. We need to send that distress signal now." We climbed the stairs to the communications room on the 2nd floor. The radio equipment was old but functional. Emily powered it up and began broadcasting on the emergency frequency. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Arctic Research Facility 7 calling any station. We have a critical emergency, requesting immediate evacuation. 4 personnel need extraction. I repeat, immediate evacuation required." Static answered her, then a voice, distant and crackling. "Arctic Research Facility 7, this is Fairbanks Air Station. Confirm your emergency status." "Confirmed," Emily said. "We need helicopter extraction as soon as possible. How long until you can reach us?" A pause, more static. "Weather conditions are marginal. Heavy winds forecast. Earliest we can reach your location is 0400 hours, approximately 7 hours from now." 7 hours. We had to survive for 7 hours. I looked at the mark on my arm. It had reached my shoulder now, spreading like frostbite but glowing with that pale blue light. 7 hours felt like an eternity. "Acknowledged," Emily said. "We will be at the landing pad at 0400 hours. Please hurry." She ended the transmission and looked at me. At the spreading mark on my arm, "Rook, how do you feel?" "Cold," I said, "but it is not painful. It is almost peaceful, like falling asleep." Her face went pale. "That is what Thomas said the day before we found him. Fight it, Rook. You have to fight it." "I am trying." An explosion of glass from downstairs. The creatures had reached the generator building. I heard David shouting, Amanda screaming. Emily and I ran for the stairs. The main floor was chaos. Two of the creatures had smashed through the windows and were advancing on David and Amanda, who had backed into a corner near the fuel tanks. The generators were still running, their diesel engines roaring, but the temperature in the room was dropping rapidly despite the heat they produced. One of the creatures reached for Amanda, its six-fingered hand extended, frost forming in the air around it. I did not think. I just acted. I grabbed a pipe wrench from David's toolbox and swung it at the creature's arm. The wrench connected with a sound like shattering glass. The creature's arm broke off, falling to the floor where it shattered into hundreds of ice shards. The creature recoiled, and for a moment I thought we had hurt it. But then the arm began to reform, ice crystals pulling together, rebuilding the limb from nothing. "They can regenerate," I shouted. "Physical damage is not enough." "The charges are set," David yelled back. 30-minute timer, we have to go now." Emily grabbed Amanda and pulled her toward the exit. I helped David, and together we ran for the door. Behind us, more creatures poured through the broken windows. 5 of them. 8. A dozen. The vault must have contained hundreds of samples, and all of them were breaking free. We made it outside and ran toward the landing pad. It was located 300 yards from the main facility, deliberately placed far from the buildings in case of accidents during helicopter operations. 300 yards that felt like 3 miles. The handprints in the snow had multiplied impossibly. The ground was nothing but frozen impressions now, overlapping, forming a solid mass of 6-fingered marks. I stumbled, fell. My legs would not work properly anymore. The cold inside me was spreading faster now. I could feel it in my chest, around my heart. Emily and Amanda grabbed my arms and hauled me up, half carrying me toward the landing pad. Behind us, the generator building exploded. The blast was enormous. A fireball rose into the night sky, bright as the sun, turning everything orange and red. The shockwave knocked us down. Heat washed over us, melting the snow, evaporating the handprints. I heard the creatures screaming, their voices like wind through ice caves. We picked ourselves up and kept running. The landing pad was just ahead. A flat concrete square marked with yellow paint, designed to guide helicopter pilots in the darkness. We reached it and collapsed, gasping, our clothes smoking from the heat of the explosion. I looked back at the facility. The generator building was gone, reduced to burning rubble, but the fire was spreading. The connecting corridors were catching. The main building would be next, and in the flames I could see shapes moving. The creatures were burning, but they were not dying. They were trying to escape. "We did not destroy them," Amanda said, horror in her voice. "The fire is not enough. They are still moving." She was right. The creatures were fleeing the flames, their ice-like bodies melting but not dissipating. They were becoming liquid, pools of glowing blue water that flowed across the snow, moving with purpose, seeking cold where they could refreeze and reform. "The permafrost," I said, understanding flooding through me. "They are going into the permafrost, where it is coldest, where they can survive until the fire dies." "Then it is over," David said. "We failed. They will just wait underground until they can emerge again." I looked down at my arm. The mark had spread to my neck now. I could feel it creeping toward my face, toward my brain. Soon I would be like them, conscious but frozen, trapped between life and death. Unless... "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Distant, cold. "There is one more thing we can do." I told them my plan. Emily immediately refused. Amanda begged me not to. Even David, who barely knew me, tried to talk me out of it. But I had seen the truth in my visions. I knew what these things were, and I knew what it would cost to stop them permanently. The mark had reached my jaw. I could feel my thoughts beginning to slow, to freeze. I did not have much time. "Take care of each other," I said. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them about the ice." Then I stood up and began walking back toward the burning facility. Every step toward the flames felt like moving through molasses. My body was shutting down, the cold spreading through my nervous system, taking control of my muscles, my movements. But beneath the numbing cold, I could feel something else, a connection. The mark on my skin was not just a symptom of what was happening to me. It was a bridge, a link between my consciousness and theirs. I could feel them now, all of them, hundreds of minds, alien and ancient, calling out in that frozen darkness. They were afraid. They had been afraid for 68,000 years, trapped, aware, unable to die, unable to live. Just endless consciousness suspended in ice, watching the millennia pass like seconds, feeling every moment of their imprisonment. "Rook, stop!" Emily's voice came from behind me, but it sounded distant, muffled, like she was shouting through water. I kept walking. The heat from the burning facility should have been overwhelming, but I barely felt it. The cold inside me was stronger than any external temperature now. I walked through pools of melted snow, past burning debris, toward the place where the main laboratory had stood. The building was collapsing. Walls were caving inward, the roof sagging, but I could see them in the flames, the creatures, or rather, what remained of them, puddles of glowing blue liquid flowing across the ground, seeking escape, seeking the permafrost below where they could freeze again and wait. I knelt beside one of the pools. Up close, I could see shapes moving within the liquid, faces, hands, all of them reaching up, trying to form, trying to solidify in the heat. The whispers were louder here, no longer incomprehensible. I could understand them now, not the words themselves, but the meaning behind them. They were begging, pleading, not to be released as I had thought, but to be ended, to finally, mercifully die. They had not wanted to wake up. They had not wanted to escape. We had misunderstood everything. When they moved in the ice, when they pressed against the boundaries of their containers, they were not trying to break free. They were trying to warn us, trying to make us understand what they had become, what had been done to them. I placed my hand in the glowing pool. The liquid was impossibly cold, colder than anything I had ever felt. It flowed up my arm into the mark on my skin, and suddenly I was not looking through my own eyes anymore. I was looking through theirs, through all of theirs. I saw what had happened 68,000 years ago. I saw a civilization, not human, not exactly, something that had existed before humanity or alongside it in a form we had never known. They had been like us in some ways. They built, they learned, they loved, they dreamed of the future. And then the storm came. Not a natural storm, something else, something that descended from the sky with purpose and malice. It was cold given consciousness, winter made manifest, an entity that fed on heat, on life, on the warmth of living things. It swept across the world in a matter of hours, freezing everything in its path. Oceans turned to ice. Forests became crystal sculptures, and the people, these ancient people, were caught in the middle of their lives. Frozen so quickly that their bodies crystallized, but their minds remained aware. The entity had meant to consume them entirely, but something went wrong. Instead of absorbing their life energy, it had trapped them, imprisoned them in the ice, unable to die, unable to escape. And when the entity moved on, searching for more warmth to devour, it left them behind. Thousands of them, trapped in the permafrost, conscious, suffering, for millennia. They had not been trying to escape when we drilled into the ice and brought up samples. They had been trying to communicate, to warn us, because the entity that had frozen them was still out there, still hungry. And every time we brought their frozen remains to the surface, every time we warmed the samples even slightly, we sent a signal, a beacon, calling it back. It was coming back now. I could feel it. Something vast and cold and incomprehensibly ancient, drawn by the fire and heat and life of the research facility. It was still far away, but getting closer. In hours it would arrive, and when it did, it would freeze everything. The facility, the surrounding landscape, anyone still alive, and this time there would be no escape. Unless I stopped it. I understood now why I had to do this, why the mark had spread through me so quickly. I was not being infected or transformed. I was being chosen. The trapped consciousnesses had recognized something in me when I first touched the sample, a resonance, a compatibility. They had marked me not to harm me but to prepare me, to make me into a vessel. Because there was only one way to stop the entity, only one way to break the connection it had established with this place. Someone had to take the place of the trapped souls. Someone had to become the anchor, the focus point, and then sever the link permanently. By freezing completely, by becoming ice, by accepting the same fate they had endured for 68,000 years. The difference was, I would not be trapped. I would not suffer as they had. Because in the moment of my transformation, in the instant my consciousness crystallized, I would use that connection to send a message, a command, a final instruction that would resonate through every frozen sample, every drop of melted ice water, every fragment that had been brought to the surface. I would tell them to let go, to finally mercifully die. And in dying, they would take the entity's anchor with them. They would sever its connection to this world. It would lose its way back. It would drift in the void between dimensions, searching eternally for the beacon that no longer existed. I understand now, I said, though I was not sure if I was speaking out loud or thinking the words. I know what has to be done. The glowing liquid flowed up my arm, across my chest, toward my heart. I did not resist. Around me, the other pools were moving too, converging on my location. They were not attacking. They were gathering, preparing, waiting for me to give the signal. I heard running footsteps behind me. Emily and Amanda had followed me back. They were shouting, but I could not make out the words anymore. My hearing was fading. My vision was narrowing. Everything was becoming cold and quiet and distant. I thought about my life. 32 years, not long but long enough. I had seen things most people never would. I had made discoveries, had contributed to human knowledge, and now I would make one final contribution. I would save the world from something it did not even know existed. The mark reached my heart. I felt it stop beating, felt my blood crystallize in my veins, felt my thoughts begin to slow and freeze. And in that final moment of consciousness, I reached out through the connection to every trapped soul, every frozen fragment, every sample that had been extracted from the permafrost. I showed them what I had seen, the entity, the danger, the need to end it all. And I felt them understand, felt them agree, felt 68,000 years of suffering finally given purpose. Together we let go. The explosion was not fire or heat. It was the opposite, a blast of cold so intense it extinguished the flames in an instant. The burning buildings froze solid mid-collapse. The air itself crystallized, ice forming from nothing. And at the center of it all, I felt my body transforming, becoming ice, becoming a statue, becoming a monument to the choice I had made. But I was not alone in there. The other consciousnesses were with me, merging with me, becoming one collective entity, and in that merger we had the power to do what I could not do alone. We reached out across the dimensional barrier, found the entity. It was close now, so close, just hours away. We could feel its hunger, its cold, terrible hunger. It sensed us too, sensed the beacon, began moving faster, eager to return to its feeding ground. But we were not a beacon anymore. We were a trap. We seized the connection between the entity and this world, the thread it had followed for 68,000 years, the link it had used to mark its territory, and we severed it, cut it completely, cast it adrift in the void. The entity's rage washed over us. It thrashed and clawed at the barrier between dimensions, trying to force its way through. But without the anchor, without the beacon, it could not find purchase. It could not manifest. It could only scream its frustration into the emptiness as it drifted away, farther and farther, until even its rage faded to nothing. And then we began to die. Really die, all of us together. The trapped consciousnesses from 68,000 years ago and me, the researcher who had stumbled into their prison. We dissolved, not into nothing but into something else. Something beyond cold and ice and physical form. We became memory, became echo, became a warning frozen into the permafrost itself, a message for anyone who might drill deep enough to find us. Do not wake the ice. Do not disturb what sleeps below. Some things are frozen for a reason. My last thought before consciousness faded entirely was of Emily and Amanda and David. I hoped they would survive, hoped they would understand, hoped they would tell the world what had happened here so no one would ever make the same mistake again. Then everything went dark and cold and silent, and I became ice. Emily stumbled backward as the wave of cold expanded from where Rook had been standing. It was like nothing she had ever experienced. Not natural cold, not the cold of Arctic winter or frozen nitrogen. This was cold that seemed to exist outside of physics, outside of thermodynamics. It froze the fire, it froze the air, it froze everything. When it passed, when the wave dissipated into the night, she forced herself to look. Rook was still there, or rather a statue of Rook was still there, perfectly preserved in clear ice down to the finest detail. His expression was peaceful, almost serene, and around him, scattered across the ground, were hundreds of other ice sculptures, human-shaped but not quite human, the ancient people, the ones who had been trapped. They were all there, frozen in various poses of release, of relief. And every single one of them was crumbling, turning to powder, becoming nothing more than frost that scattered in the wind. He did it, Amanda whispered beside her. He saved us, but at what cost? Emily did not answer. She could not. She just stood there, watching as the ice statue of Rook began to sublime, turning directly from solid to gas, molecules dispersing into the air. Within minutes, there was nothing left. No body. No evidence he had ever existed except for the mark in the snow where he had stood. David joined them, his face pale in the light of the dying fires. The creatures are gone, he said. All of them. The samples in the vault, the pools of liquid, everything. They just dissolved, like they never existed. They did exist, Emily said quietly. And they suffered for so long, but now they are finally at rest. They stood in silence for a long time, the three survivors, surrounded by the wreckage of the research facility. Finally, Amanda checked her watch. 0300 hours, she said. The helicopter will be here in an hour. We should get to the landing pad. They walked slowly through the ruined facility. The fires had gone out, extinguished by Rook's final act. The buildings were damaged but not completely destroyed. In a few days, maybe a week, investigators would arrive. They would find the wreckage, the empty vault, the missing samples, and they would demand answers. Emily would give them answers. She would tell them everything about the ice, about the trapped consciousnesses, about the entity that had nearly returned, about Rook's sacrifice. Some of them would believe her, most would not, but she would tell the truth anyway because that was what Rook would have wanted. They reached the landing pad and sat down to wait. The sky above was beginning to lighten. Dawn was coming. The long Arctic night was ending. Do you think there are more of them? Amanda asked. More trapped souls in the permafrost, in other locations? I do not know, Emily admitted. But if there are, we need to be careful. We need to understand what we are dealing with before we start drilling, before we start bringing them to the surface. We need to establish protocols, David added. Safety measures, ways to detect if we are accessing areas where something like this might be frozen. We cannot let this happen again. Emily nodded. We will. We will make sure Rook's sacrifice meant something. We will make sure this research leads to better understanding, not more tragedy. They heard the helicopter before they saw it, the sound of rotors cutting through the pre-dawn air. Then lights appeared on the horizon, growing brighter as the aircraft approached. It circled once, the pilot assessing the damage to the facility, then descended toward the landing pad. As the helicopter touched down, Emily took one last look at the ruined buildings, at the place where Rook had made his final stand. She would never forget what had happened here. None of them would, but they had survived, and they had a responsibility now, to tell the story, to warn others, to honor the sacrifice of one man who had given everything to save a world that would never know his name. The helicopter door opened. A rescue technician jumped out and ran toward them. "Are you all right? What happened here?" Emily looked at Amanda and David. They nodded. They had already discussed what they would say. The official story. The one that would get them home safely without raising too many questions that could not be answered. "Fire," Emily said. "The generator malfunctioned. We barely got out in time." "What about the fourth member of your team?" the technician asked, consulting a clipboard. "Your evacuation request mentioned 4 personnel." Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. Not the cold of the entity, not the cold of the trapped souls, just the cold of loss, of grief, of knowing someone was gone and would never come back. "He did not make it," she said quietly. "He died trying to contain the damage, trying to save us." The technician bowed his head respectfully. "I am sorry for your loss. We will need to file a report. Get a recovery team out here to look for his body." "You will not find one," Amanda said. Her voice was steady, but tears were running down her face. "The fire was too intense. There is nothing left to recover." It was not quite a lie. There really was nothing left. Rook had become air, had become memory, had become a warning frozen into the earth itself. They boarded the helicopter. As it lifted off, Emily looked down at the research facility one last time. In the growing dawn light, she could see something she had not noticed before. The pattern of the handprints in the snow had changed. Instead of pointing toward the buildings, they now pointed outward, away, as if the things that had made them were leaving, or had been set free. "Thank you," she thought, though she was not sure who she was thanking. "Rook, the ancient souls, both." The helicopter turned south, toward Fairbanks, toward civilization, toward warmth and light and life. Behind them, the Arctic research facility grew smaller. Within a month, it would be buried under snow. Within a year, it would be dismantled and removed. Within a decade, nature would reclaim the site entirely, covering all evidence of what had happened there. But the story would survive. Emily would make sure of that. She would write reports, give lectures, publish papers. Not about what had really happened, that would sound too much like fiction, but about the dangers of permafrost research, about the need for caution when accessing ancient ice, about respecting the frozen past. And somewhere, in research facilities and universities around the world, other scientists would read her work. They would take precautions. They would be careful. They would remember that some things are frozen for a reason. If you have enjoyed this story, if it has made you think about what might be hidden beneath the ice, I encourage you to share it with others. Subscribe to hear more tales from the edges of science and the unknown. And remember, the world is full of mysteries we do not understand. Some of them are waiting in the warmth of the jungle or the depths of the ocean, but some of them are waiting in the cold, in the frozen places where nothing should be able to survive but somehow does. Be careful what you dig up. Be careful what you thaw, because some things have been frozen for 68,000 years, and they have been waiting all that time for someone to make the mistake of bringing them back to the surface. 3 months had passed since the incident at Arctic Research Facility 7. 3 months since Emily, Amanda, and David had been evacuated from that frozen hell. 3 months since Rook had sacrificed himself to save them, to save the world from something it would never know had nearly destroyed it. Emily sat in her office at the University of Washington, staring at the report she had been trying to write for weeks. The official version, the sanitized version, the version that would satisfy the investigation board without revealing the truth that would make her sound insane. The preliminary findings had been released 2 weeks ago. Equipment malfunction, fire, 1 fatality. The facility would not be rebuilt. Future research in that area would be suspended indefinitely. Case closed. Except it was not closed. Not for Emily, not for any of them. Her phone buzzed, a text message from Amanda. "Turn on the news, CNN, now." Emily grabbed the remote and switched on the television mounted on her office wall. The news anchor was in the middle of a report, and what Emily saw made her blood run cold. Unexpected discovery in northern Canada. Research teams drilling in the permafrost near Inuvik have reported strange anomalies in ice core samples extracted from depths exceeding 1,000 meters. Dr. Chen Zhao, lead researcher on the project, describes the findings as unprecedented. The screen cut to footage of a research facility, not as remote as the one in Alaska, but similar in design. A Chinese scientist appeared, speaking through a translator. We have found what appear to be organic shapes within the ice. The formations are unlike anything documented in previous permafrost studies. They seem to move within the solid ice structure, which should be impossible. We are conducting further analysis to determine what we have discovered. Emily felt her hands begin to shake. She grabbed her phone and called Amanda. "You are watching it," Amanda answered immediately. "They are making the same mistake we did," Emily said. "They do not know what they are dealing with. They are going to wake them up." "We have to warn them," Amanda said. "We have to tell them to stop." "They will not listen. Who would believe us? We have no proof. Rook is gone. The samples from our facility were destroyed. All we have is our story, and that story sounds like science fiction." "Then we go there," Amanda insisted. "We fly to Canada. We talk to them in person. We show them the marks I still have on my arm. We make them understand." Emily looked down at her own arm. The faint blue glow that had appeared after the incident had faded weeks ago, but she could still see the trace of where it had been. A reminder of what had happened, of what had almost happened. "All right," she said. "I will book flights. Can you reach David? We need to move fast. If that facility is already extracting samples, we might already be too late." "I am on it," Amanda said and hung up. Emily stared at the television. The news report had moved on to other stories, but the image of those ice cores remained burned into her mind. She had seen that same blue glow before. She knew what it meant. The trapped consciousnesses were not unique to Alaska. They were scattered throughout the Arctic permafrost. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all waiting, all suffering. And now humans were finding them again. Her office door opened without warning. Emily jumped, but it was only David. He looked terrible. He had lost weight since returning from Alaska. His eyes were sunken, dark circles underneath them suggesting he was not sleeping well. "You saw the news," he said. "It was not a question." "Amanda is booking flights to Canada. We leave tomorrow if we can get seats." David shook his head. "It is not just Canada, Emily. I have been monitoring research reports from around the world. There are similar findings in Siberia, in Greenland, in Antarctica. Everyone is drilling deeper now, trying to extract older ice for climate data, and they are all finding the same thing: shapes in the ice, movement, anomalies that cannot be explained." Emily felt her stomach drop. How many facilities? "At least a dozen that have published preliminary findings, probably more that have not gone public yet. The permafrost is thawing faster than predicted. The ice that held these things trapped for millennia is melting. They are becoming accessible, and every research team that finds them is making the same mistakes we made, bringing them to the surface, warming them, trying to study them." "We cannot warn them all," Emily said quietly. "We cannot be in a dozen places at once." "No," David agreed. "But we can do something else. We can go public, really public. We can tell the world what we found, what happened to Rook, what nearly happened to all of us. They will call us crazy. They will discredit us. Our careers will be over." "Our careers are already over," David said bitterly. "I cannot work. I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those things. I hear the whispering. I feel the cold. I would rather be called crazy and maybe save some lives than stay silent and watch this happen again and again." Emily was quiet for a long moment. He was right. She knew he was right. But going public meant destroying everything she had built: her reputation, her credibility, everything she had worked for over 30 years of research. But what was that compared to what Rook had given up? He had sacrificed his life, his future, everything. And he had done it without hesitation because he understood what was at stake. "All right," she said finally. "We go public, but we do it right. We need evidence. We need to document everything, every facility that is reporting anomalies, every sample that shows movement. We build a case that is so comprehensive they cannot ignore it. And we need to find out more about what Rook discovered," David added. "About the entity, about what really happened 68,000 years ago. Because if that thing is still out there, still searching for a way back, we need to know how to stop it permanently." A knock at the door. Amanda entered, her phone in her hand. "Flights are booked. We leave for Inuvik tomorrow morning at 6, but there is something else. I got an email from someone at the Canadian facility, a researcher named Dr. Emily Harrison. She says she has been experiencing strange symptoms since handling the ice cores, numbness in her extremities, a feeling of cold that will not go away, and marks on her skin that glow faintly at night." Emily and David exchanged glances. They both knew what that meant. "She is being marked," Emily said. "Just like Rook was, just like we all were to a lesser degree. The consciousnesses in the ice are choosing her, preparing her." "Preparing her for what?" Amanda asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "For the same choice Rook made," David said quietly. "To become the bridge, the vessel, the sacrifice." "Then we have to get there before she makes that choice," Emily said, standing up and grabbing her coat. "We have to tell her there is another way. We have to tell her what Rook learned, that the consciousnesses do not want to be freed. They want to be ended, but they cannot do it themselves. They need someone to help them." "And how do we do that without creating another situation like Alaska?" Amanda asked. "How do we end their suffering without calling back the entity?" It was a good question, one Emily did not have an answer to. Rook had severed the entity's connection to Earth, but he had only been able to do it because the consciousnesses in Alaska had all been gathered in one place, because the research facility had brought dozens of samples together. If the trapped souls were scattered across the entire Arctic, separated by thousands of miles. "We need more information," Emily said. "We need to understand the entity better, where it came from, what it is, how it was able to trap those consciousnesses in the first place." "I might be able to help with that," a voice said from the doorway. They all turned. A woman stood there, probably in her late 60s, with white hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was dressed simply, jeans and a sweater, but there was something about her bearing that suggested authority, experience. "Who are you?" Emily asked. "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Winters. I am a theoretical physicist specializing in dimensional phenomena. I have been studying reports of the Alaska incident for the past 2 months. I know what really happened there, and I know what you are dealing with." "How?" David demanded. "The reports are classified, the real reports, not the public version." Elizabeth smiled slightly. "I have been researching phenomena like this for 40 years. I have contacts in various agencies, people who share information with me when something unusual happens, something that does not fit conventional explanations. The Alaska incident raised red flags across multiple departments, too many anomalies, too many inconsistencies in the official story, so I started digging, and what I found led me to you." She stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. From her bag, she pulled out a thick folder and laid it on Emily's desk. "I know about the ice samples, about the shapes that move, about Rook's sacrifice, and I know about the entity because this is not the first time it has happened." Emily opened the folder. Inside were documents, old documents. Some of them looked like they dated back decades, centuries even, reports of mysterious freezing events. Entire villages found frozen solid overnight, ships trapped in ice that formed impossibly fast, expeditions that disappeared in the Arctic, leaving behind only strange marks in the snow. "The entity you encountered is older than human civilization," Elizabeth continued. It is not from our dimension, not from our universe. It exists in a place where heat does not exist, where entropy has run its course, where everything is cold and dark and still. Occasionally, the barriers between our reality and that place thin. Weak points form, and when they do, the entity can reach through, can manifest here in our warm, living world. Why? Amanda asked. What does it want? Heat, energy, life, everything that does not exist in its realm. It is not evil exactly. It is just hungry, desperate, trying to survive in a place that is fundamentally hostile to everything we consider normal. When it found Earth 68,000 years ago, it must have seemed like paradise, a world full of warmth and light and living things. So it fed. And the people it froze? Emily asked. The trapped consciousnesses. A mistake, Elizabeth said. The entity was trying to absorb their life energy completely, but something went wrong. Maybe it was the rapid nature of the freeze. Maybe it was some quality of those ancient people's consciousness that we do not understand. But instead of being absorbed, they were preserved, trapped. And their suffering, their awareness, created a beacon, an anchor point, a way for the entity to find its way back to Earth even after it had been driven away. Driven away by what? David asked. Elizabeth hesitated. That part is less clear. The records are fragmentary, but it seems that 68,000 years ago there was an event, a global catastrophe, volcanoes erupting simultaneously across the planet, massive amounts of heat and energy released into the atmosphere. It was enough to force the entity back through the dimensional barrier, to seal the weak point, but it left behind the frozen souls as a marker, a thread it could follow. Until Rook severed that thread, Emily said, understanding dawning. Until he became the anchor himself and then cut the connection. Exactly, Elizabeth confirmed. He did not just sacrifice himself, he rewrote the rules. He took the place of the beacon and then destroyed it from within. It was brilliant, impossible, and it worked. But if there are more trapped consciousnesses scattered throughout the Arctic, Amanda said slowly, then there are more potential anchor points, more threads the entity could follow. Yes, Elizabeth said grimly. Every location where trapped souls exist is a potential doorway. And with climate change accelerating, with the permafrost melting faster every year, more of these sites are being exposed. More samples are being brought to the surface. We are essentially creating dozens of weak points, dozens of invitations for the entity to return. The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. It was not just about warning a few research facilities. It was about understanding that humanity's curiosity, combined with climate change, was opening doors that should never be opened. So what do we do? Emily asked. How do we stop this? Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. It looked like a modified Geiger counter, but with additional sensors and a digital display. I have been working on this for years. It is a dimensional resonance detector. It can sense the presence of non-terrestrial consciousness. The trapped souls emit a very specific frequency. With this, we can identify locations where they exist before samples are extracted. We can map them. And then what? David asked. We cannot just leave them there. They are suffering. They have been suffering for thousands of years. No, Elizabeth agreed. We cannot leave them, but we also cannot risk bringing them to the surface without proper protocols. What we need to do is develop a method for releasing them safely, for ending their suffering without creating new anchor points. How? Emily asked. Controlled sublimation, Elizabeth said. We do not extract the samples. We do not bring them to the surface. Instead, we go to them. We drill down carefully, identify the ice containing the trapped consciousnesses, and introduce a specific pattern of heat and radiation that will cause the ice to sublime directly from solid to gas. The consciousnesses will be released. Their suffering will end. And there will be no liquid phase, no opportunity for them to maintain cohesion or form new anchor points. Will that work? Amanda asked skeptically. I do not know, Elizabeth admitted, but it is the best theory I have, and right now it is better than doing nothing. Emily looked at the device, then at the folder full of historical documents, then at her two colleagues who had survived Alaska with her. They were being offered a mission, a purpose, a way to honor Rook's sacrifice by ensuring that what he had done was not in vain. "All right," she said. "We do this. We go to Canada first. We warn Dr. Harrison. We test your device. And if it works, we start mapping every location where these trapped souls might exist. We develop protocols. We train teams. We make sure that no one else has to make the choice Rook made." "It will take years," Elizabeth warned. "Maybe decades. The Arctic is vast. The permafrost covers millions of square miles. And we will be working against climate change, against melting ice, against research facilities that do not understand what they are dealing with." "Then we start now," David said. "Today, we do not waste another moment." Amanda nodded. "Agreed, for Rook, for all the trapped souls still suffering, we do this." Elizabeth smiled, and for the first time since entering the office she looked hopeful. "Then welcome to the Permafrost Monitoring Initiative. It is not official, it is not sanctioned, but it is necessary, and you three are exactly the people we need." Over the next several hours they planned. Elizabeth had been preparing for this for years. It turned out. She had funding from private sources. She had contacts in various governments who were aware of unusual phenomena but could not speak publicly. She had equipment, protocols, and a small team of researchers who believed in the work even if they did not fully understand what they were dealing with. By evening, they had a plan. Emily, Amanda, and David would fly to Canada the next day. They would meet with Dr. Harrison and her team. They would test Elizabeth's detection device and determine if the Canadian samples posed the same risk as the Alaskan ones. If they did, they would implement the first controlled sublimation attempt. It was risky. It was experimental. It might not work, but it was better than doing nothing. Better than allowing more research facilities to make the same mistakes. Better than risking the return of an entity that could freeze the entire world. As Emily packed her office that night, preparing for what might be a very long trip, she found herself thinking about Rook, about the choice he had made, about the sacrifice he had given without hesitation. She pulled out her phone and opened the photo album. There were only 3 pictures of him. One from his arrival at the facility, looking nervous and excited. One from a group dinner, all of them smiling before they knew what they would find in the ice. And one final photo, taken the day before everything went wrong, showing Rook examining an ice core sample with intense concentration. In that last photo, if you looked closely, you could see the faint beginning of the mark on his hand. The first touch of blue that would eventually spread through his entire body. He had not known then what it meant, had not understood what was being asked of him. But when the moment came, when the choice presented itself, he had not hesitated. Emily saved the photos to a secure drive, backed them up in 3 different locations, because no matter what happened, no matter how long this mission took or what they encountered along the way, she wanted to make sure that someone, somewhere, would remember, would know that a man named Rook had given everything to save a world that would never know his name. She turned off her office lights and headed home to pack. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something, a new mission, a new purpose, a way to fight against the cold that waited in the depths of the earth. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of grief, for Rook, for Thomas, for all the trapped souls who had suffered for so long, for the weight of knowledge that could never be shared publicly, for the burden of understanding that some threats could never be disclosed, because the panic they would cause would be worse than the danger itself. Outside her window, snow was beginning to fall, the first snow of the season. Each flake was unique, crystalline, beautiful in its complexity, but Emily looked at it differently now. She saw the structure of ice, the way molecules arranged themselves in geometric patterns, the way cold could trap things, preserve things, keep them suspended between life and death. She thought about what Elizabeth had said, about the entity existing in a realm where heat did not exist, where everything was cold and still and dark. It was hard to imagine, hard to comprehend, but Emily had felt a touch of that cold, had felt it spreading through her body after contact with the samples, and she knew that if the entity ever fully manifested on Earth, if it was ever able to anchor itself permanently to this world, that cold would spread everywhere. The oceans would freeze. The atmosphere would crystallize. All life would become like those ancient people, trapped in ice, aware but unable to move, unable to die, suffering forever in frozen darkness. That could not happen, would not happen, not while Emily and her team were watching, not while they had the means to fight back. She picked up her phone and sent a text to Amanda and David. Meet at the airport at 5 a.m. Bring everything you might need for an extended stay. This is just the beginning. The responses came quickly. Amanda sent a thumbs up emoji. David sent a simple ready. Emily smiled slightly. They were good people, dedicated, brave. They had survived something that would have broken most people, and now they were choosing to face it again, to face it repeatedly because it was necessary, because someone had to do it. She thought about adding something to the message, something about Rook, about how they were doing this for him, but in the end she did not. Rook's sacrifice spoke for itself. It did not need to be memorialized in words. It would be memorialized in action, in every trapped soul they released, in every potential disaster they prevented, in every life they saved that would never know it had been in danger. That was enough. That had to be enough. Emily turned off her phone and finished packing. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and beautiful and cold. But inside there was warmth, there was purpose, there was hope. The ice samples had stopped moving in Alaska. The threat there had been neutralized. But around the world, in the frozen places where ancient secrets waited, other samples were beginning to stir. Other consciousnesses were waking. Other warnings were being ignored. But now there was a team watching, a team prepared, a team that understood what was at stake and was willing to fight. The long battle had begun. The work of monitoring the permafrost, of tracking the trapped souls, of preventing the entity's return would take years, decades maybe. It would require dedication, sacrifice, and resources that would always be limited because the threat could never be publicly acknowledged. But Emily and her team were ready. They had seen what waited in the ice. They had felt the cold that existed beyond cold. They had witnessed one man's sacrifice to save the world. And they would honor that sacrifice by making sure it was not in vain. As Emily finally closed her suitcase and prepared for bed, she took one last look at the photo of Rook. He was smiling in the picture, completely unaware of what his future held, but there was something in his eyes, a determination, a willingness to do what was necessary, whatever the cost. "Thank you," Emily whispered to the photo, "for everything. We will make sure your sacrifice mattered. We will make sure the ice keeps its secrets. We will make sure the entity never returns." The photo did not answer, but somewhere in the frozen depths of the Arctic permafrost, in the molecules of ice that had once been a man named Rook, perhaps there was an echo of understanding. Perhaps the message was received. The dead do not stay buried, but sometimes the buried help the living survive. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think about the mysteries that lie beneath the ice and the sacrifices made in silence by those who protect us from threats we will never know existed, please share it with others who appreciate tales of horror and heroism. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that explore the dark corners of our world and the brave souls who venture into them. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts about Rook's sacrifice and what you would do if faced with a similar choice. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. Remember, the world is full of frozen places, full of buried secrets, and sometimes those secrets are buried for very good reasons. Respect the ice, respect the cold, and remember that some prices are paid in silence by heroes whose names will never be known. Thank you for listening to this tale from the edge of science and the unknown. Until next time, stay warm, stay safe, and remember that not all monsters come from the darkness. Some come from the cold.